Hi everyone, welcome to this video on how to bind local list data that has hierarchical relationships and service URLs from a remote server to the Syncfusion Blazor TreeGrid. I am going to show you how to bind data to Blazor TreeGrid in a Blazor WebAssembly application. If you want to know more about Blazor WebAssembly app and how to add Syncfusion components to it, then you can watch video titled Create a Blazor WebAssembly app and add Syncfusion Blazor components, which I have shared in the YouTube card. First, I will open my existing Blazor WebAssembly app. I have already installed the Syncfusion Blazor package. Then I registered Syncfusion Blazor service with a valid trial license and referenced the CSS file from the installed Syncfusion Blazor package. To work with Blazor TreeGrid in the index component, I have included the Syncfusion Blazor TreeGrid namespace. I have added Syncfusion Blazor TreeGrid with the properties data source to bind data, ID mapping to identify the nodes uniquely, and parent ID mapping to identify the parent node for that item. The ID mapping and parent ID mapping were configured since the data source assigned here is a self-referential type, that is flat data. I added the tree column index property and set the value to 1 so that the second column will act as the expand and collapse column. I have enabled paging and customized the page size mode and page size using the TreeGrid page settings tag. Also, I have sorted the columns progress and duration using the TreeGrid sort settings tag. I have enabled filtering. Using the TreeGrid columns tag, I have added 5 columns: task ID, task name, duration, progress, and priority. Here in the onInitialized method, I have added business object to the tree data list object. You will notice that the data is a flat data. Now I will run this project. You can see the tree grid with flat data bound to it and sorting, filtering, and paging enabled. Let me configure the tree grid with hierarchical data. First, I add a new property of type list of business object children so that I can add child nodes to a node. In the onInitialized method, let me remove the existing code and add hierarchical data. Here, I have created 2 parent nodes with child nodes and added those nodes to the tree data object. In the sftreegrid tag, I remove the ID mapping and parent ID mapping properties since these are not applicable for hierarchical data. I remove the code related to paging, filtering, and sorting since they are out of scope for this data binding topic. Next, I add the child mapping property and set the value children so that TreeGrid can understand the property children holds the child nodes. I save the file and run the application. You can see the TreeGrid loaded with hierarchical data with 2 parents with their child nodes. Now, let us see about binding a service URL from a remote server to the TreeGrid. I need to make use of the Data Manager component to access the online data service. Data Manager is a Syncfusion component that acts as a gateway and interacts with both local and remote data sources. By default, the TreeGrid will load remote data on demand in scenarios like when you expand the parent nodes or when you navigate through different pages. To access the Data Manager, I use the namespace Syncfusion Blazor Data. Within the sftreegrid tag, I add the SF Data Manager tag. To interact with a remote data source, I provide the endpoint URL in the Data Manager with a valid service URL. I set the cross-domain property to true so that Data Manager can understand the current Blazor application and remote service are of different domains. I set the adapter with the Web API adapter object as the service URL passed to the Data Manager is created based on Web API standards. I remove the child mapping and data source properties, add the t-value property and set the value business object so that TreeGrid can understand the data source type. I add the ID mapping and parent ID mapping properties since the remote data is a self-referential type. Now, I will explain the structure of the remote data used in this sample. As the TreeGrid loads the remote data level by level and not all the data at once, I need to define a property to represent whether the node is a parent or child. Before I define that property, Here, in this data source, you can see the isParent field holds the value true, which indicates that it is a parent node. But if it is false, it is a child node. This information helps the tree grid identify the parent nodes from the data source and then draw the expand and collapse button while loading them on demand. So now I will set the tree grid property as child mapping with this column name is parent from the data source. In the business object class, I remove the existing field names and add the needed fields with respect to the remote data. I remove the other code in the code directive. I save the file and run the application. You can see the tree grid with remote data loaded in it. I click the expand button and it loads the child nodes on demand. Finally, let me summarize the main points. I explained the steps to bind list data with hierarchical relationships and service URLs from a remote server to the Syncfusion Blazor tree grid. You can download this working example from the GitHub link in the video description below. You can also check if you are eligible for our community license, which gives you a free license key to use our Blazor products. If you found this video useful, click the like button and subscribe to our channel to get notifications about new videos. Thanks for watching.